You're listening to Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. We're coming to you from the unceded traditional territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations around Vancouver, BC. I'm your host, Bernadine Fox, and this is the show that dares to change how we think about mental health. Welcome to Rethreading Madness.
When I've never been further from knowing what the hell I'm gonna do.
You're listening to Rethreading Madness on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm Bernadine Fox, and right now I have the pleasure of speaking with Lynn, who is someone in Illinois who's currently going to school, university, I believe. Is that correct, Lynn? You're going to university?
That's correct.
Okay. She is attending a university in Illinois in psychology, working towards a doctorate degree. She's written an article called Dear Therapist, this is what BPD stigma looks like. And you can access it on medium.com. So welcome, Lynn.
Thank you, Bernadine.
Tell me what led up to writing this article, and I guess really what led up to you looking for therapy.
Yeah, I started looking for serious long-term therapy about 3-4 years ago, just to address like childhood issues, like trauma, abuse, stuff like that. So I was looking for a long-term therapist, someone that I could connect with like relationally and also like grow a lot from. And I did find that person, and I initially had a great relationship with her, and I learned a lot. I grew as an individual. At least I thought I was. It came crashing to an end, toward the end, things that happened, which led me to look for one therapist after another. But initially, things were pretty good.
And when it crashed at the end, can you describe that just a little bit?
It was a series of events. I really can't say one thing happened, but basically what had happened was I had a series of changes in my life, a lot of loss, a lot of like job change. I lost my best friend. I lost my grandmother. I got into a car accident. So there was a lot of like stressors and transitions going on in my life. So I was showing up to session with my therapist, increasingly dysregulated, not, remembering my skills, not doing my homework. I was doing things that look like to a therapist, from the outside, that I was no longer engaging the therapeutic process, which to a lot of clinicians, that's indicative that the client is no longer benefiting from therapy. So she had made a comment regarding, I don't remember what exactly I was saying, but she made a comment. I remember this because it kind of hurt. She's like, maybe I've done everything I can to help you. And it caused a panic reaction in me because I have childhood abandonment issues. And I started panicking and asking her questions. What does that mean? I started crying. And this, went on for about 2 sessions where I was asking her questions. So she took my emotions, my signs of distress as proof that I was no longer going to benefit from therapy. Her exact words, I remember this because it cut through me. Like I remember I wrote an article right after this happened, but her exact words were, your anxiety and emotions prove to me that you're not showing up for yourself. You're showing up for the relationship. I kept thinking to myself, as someone who's in the program, in the psychology program, I thought to myself, therapy is the relationship, but okay, whatever. So she used my emotions as a reason to terminate. And I wasn't given a proper termination session. I was given one. So I had been seeing her for 2 years weekly, and I ended my services with her in one session. I didn't get input. I didn't get asked, like if I was benefiting. I never was asked that question, which I would have loved to have some input on, how things were going. But it ended in one session, and she didn't provide me proper connection to other therapists. Like there was no transfer of care, which I know in the ethics, in the psychology code of ethics, it states that there should be transfer of care. So
Right.
it was very
So I just want to recap a bit. You've been seeing this person for a year, and
weird.
at weekly, you developed a relationship with her, things were working, and then you went through a series of losses, your job, your friend, I think you said your grandma died. And then on top of it, you went into therapy thinking this was the place that you could maybe process all that loss. And instead, what she did was she terminated it. Um, did she put you on meds as well at some point?
No, she recommended about a month prior to this that I see a psychiatrist for depression symptoms, which I did. And I tried antidepressants, which interestingly made me more depressed. And as I'm learning about, neurodivergence, I'm reading a lot of articles about people who actually have like opposite symptoms when they take medication. Like it doesn't work in the way that it's supposed to for some neurodiverse people.
Right,
So it made me more depressed. And that was another reason she used to refer or to terminate me is because I had like gotten increasingly, I had suicidal thoughts and stuff. And she was saying, at the 2 year, because I had been seeing over 2 years,
mm,
she said at the 2 year point, you should have developed enough skills to not have these thoughts, to not be feeling this way. So it was proof to her that the therapy wasn't working for her. And I'm like, but I've never felt like that was my first time with medication. And I was like, I've never felt like this before. I know it's the meds and it
right.
stopped. I took them. So
And she knew you were taking the meds.
she knew I was taking the meds.
Okay, so all the things that you described seem to me to be the opposite of what should be happening in therapy if you're experiencing a lot of loss and having a reaction, an emotional reaction to medication, which, everybody is told and you're told that that could happen. It just seems really, really strange time to terminate you or to think that the therapy isn't working because I don't know. I guess the listeners can make their own decision about this, but therapy isn't like you start at A and you go to Z. You start at A and go to, G, and then you go back to C and then up to H and then back to D. And you go back and forth. And as life happens, you need to work through those new life things, events, um, with your therapist to gain new skills. And I'm really at a loss to understand why she terminated you. So she gave you one session to terminate.
She
How did
gave, sorry, what was that?
what happened to you?
It was just one session. We didn't discuss, we kept going around in circles. I kept asking her, please tell me what I did or what happened that merited being referred out. Because I never did. I never verbally abused her. I never did any of those things that, you hear about clients getting abruptly terminated would do. I never did those. So I kept asking her, I'm like, please tell me so I can understand. And she wouldn't answer. And finally, she told me it's not clinically appropriate. I wasn't sure what that meant. So I kept pressing her and she said something about just no longer thinking that she was going to be able to help me. And that was before the shocker, before the last thing that she said to me before she hung up the phone. But that really just upset me because it's like I said earlier, I never got input. And I just feel like my rights, my autonomy as a client in the mental health system were stripped from me. Like I never got asked, are you benefiting? So it's
Right. Until you were told you weren't benefiting,
yeah. And
even though you felt you were.
I started for 2 years. Like I think you can tell someone's benefiting or not in 2 years. So
Yes. Yes. And in those 2 years, had you lost a job, a friend, or your grandma before?
no, not until recent.
Yeah. So new experience, needing new life skills. Um, what was the shocker that she said before she hung up?
Well, because I had been basically crying a lot and having a lot of emotions, she said her very last words to me before she hung up the phone, she said, find someone who works with borderline personality disorder. And I was gutted because this was never a discussion in our 2 years, never. It like what? So it just shook me. I'm like, where did this even come from? And yeah.
Yeah. Can I ask another question about your therapy? I do a lot of work around therapy abuse, and this is ringing true about what happens in therapy abuse, especially the ones where there have been some exploitation. Therapists come to realize that they've done something wrong and they terminate quickly and then attach this label of borderline personality. Did any of the therapy exploitation things happen to you in this therapy, or did you have constant contact? Did she create a dependency? What?
The only thing that I think I wouldn't say she created dependency, but her boundaries weren't as firm as they should have been in terms of like, the amount of times she would contact me outside a session, or like she once asked me to like she was looking for a kitten, so she asked me if I come across any kittens, if I could help her connect with one. So she does have the sibling cat of one of the kittens that I took,
Mm,
which is like whatever, but like she presented more as like, I'm not going to say friend because that's not what occurred, but she didn't have the firm boundaries, I think, which a lot of therapists do. So,
mhm. And that is one of the things I think that people find out that their boundaries are too lax and they try and fix it by telling the client to go away instead of dealing with and reestablishing good boundaries with their clients.
mhm.
So you're left with this sort of um, comment on your way out the door, so to speak, about going to find somebody who works with borderline.
Mhm.
What happened when that? I mean, how did you react to that?
I was shocked. I kept crying. It didn't feel like it fit. It didn't feel like I own a copy of the DSM. And I went in there and looked. I looked online. I'm like, I don't relate with these traits. But if someone who I had a working relationship with for 2 years said that I'm that, then maybe I am that. So I kept trying to change twist my thoughts and behaviors to make it fit these arbitrary criteria, but it never like related or connected with me truly. Um, but it just got worse after that as I was trying to find another therapist. So that's where my article kind of comes in with what happened with that.
Right. So because you're somebody who's studying for therapy or psychology, the DSM is for our listeners is the Diagnostic Statistic Manual. It's commonly called the DSM, and what it is, it's a very thick book, and it includes every diagnosis that is recognized within the therapeutic community as being a psychiatric diagnosis. Borderline. Can you tell us, Lynn, what it says in the DSM about borderline? What is borderline? I hate to put you on the spot like that.
I mean, honestly, like there's 9 different criteria that have to be met. People like I think it's completely arbitrary. Like what, the DSM is arbitrary. What one psychologist labels you as is not what the other person will.
Mhm.
But a lot of the symptoms, like emotional reactivity, impulsivity, fear of abandonment are one, what normal people experience, and two, they're what neurodivergent people experience, like you're
Right,
autistic or
right,
some people who are autistic. So it's just I think it's a very lazy diagnosis that clinicians throw on people that they don't want to work with, honestly.
right. Mm. I've actually heard that before. I've actually heard that from my own abusive therapist. She said that borderline was a diagnosis that therapists give to clients that they don't like, is it were her exact words. You just mentioned autism. You are autistic, neurodiverse. How do
Yeah.
you?
So what happened with that is, well, I had a process of trying to look for a new therapist, which went horribly, and I could talk more about that later. I think I saw 15, 20 therapists who pathologized me, but I found one therapist, and I'm like so grateful for her because she didn't pathologize me at all. And so I've been working with her for 2 years now, and through this process, I went through some testing and stuff, and it turns out that I'm autistic, which I kind of had a feeling that I was that, but I never had a label for it. Like these are all things that applied since childhood, basically. but like she helped me find that name and that label and a different lens through which to view myself. And it felt to fit a lot more than like borderline personality disorder because like I mean, I don't want to stigmatize people, and that's not my intent, but it's just a lot of the people who I have seen personally on the extreme end of the spectrum or, on that personality spectrum, I didn't relate with.
Mhm.
So,
Yes. We're just going to take a little break here, folks, but we'll be right back.
Tanuyap, Quiget Yuans Queensna. Hi, everybody. My name is Quiget Yuans. I'm a member of the Squamish Nation and the Yagalanas clan of the Haida Nation. You're listening to Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. We live, work, play, and broadcast from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations.
I found myself in a sea of busy places, in a world of blurry faces. I found myself on the edge of insanity. I found me. My heart was beating, barely breathing, but still alive. Lost along the way, I'd given up my fight. Scattered to pieces all along the floor. Within the brokenness, I found something more. I found myself in a sea of busy places, in a world of blurry faces. I found myself on the edge of insanity. I found me. I was broken, torn apart. Scars line my arms, on my sleeve I wore my heart. They remind me what is real. No longer needing pain to feel. I found myself in a sea of busy places, in a world of blurry faces. I found myself on the edge of insanity. I found me. I found myself in a sea of busy places, in a world of blurry faces. I found myself on the edge of insanity. I found me. I found myself in a sea of busy places, in a world of blurry faces. I found myself on the edge of insanity. I found me.
You're listening to Rethreading Madness on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm Bernadine Fox, and I have the pleasure of speaking with Lynn about being misdiagnosed as borderline personality. Lynn, you were talking about neurodiversity, and I want to push that just a little bit farther down the line. I really want to talk about what happened to you as you were trying to find a therapist.
yeah, it was a nightmare. So I was going into finding a new therapist because I was having all these losses and transitions in my life I wanted to process. And also the loss of, the transition from a different therapist. What happened? I wanted to process that. So I made appointment after appointment with these different clinicians. And because I was crying so much, I mean, I had just lost, like I said, my grandma, my therapist, my job, like I'd gotten in an accident. I had all these things going on. I was completely emotionally dysregulated, but I was just crying a lot. So I went into these therapists, whether it was a phone consultation, an initial session, email, and one after another, they either turn me away without telling me why. That's what happened majority of the time. Sometimes some of them were telling me why they were turning me away, and it always came down to BPD for some reason. And it became so bad that like that was added trauma. Like that was so hard for someone who's already sensitive to rejection, as like an ADHD diagnosis that I also have, to be like, I referenced it in my article, but there's quotes that like some of them said, um, like the best treatment for quote unquote people like you is DBT, which is dialectical behavior therapy. Or like one of them would say, sounds like you've been diagnosed with borderline and I don't treat that. And they would turn me away without even giving me a chance, without, like I said, these were in email responses or the consultation interview that, some of them offer. And it was horrific. It was horrific. Like I can't even tell you like how bad I felt.
Yeah, and it relates to stigma in some ways, because it's not just in the mental health industry that people are dealing with stigma when it comes to border and just the medical profession, I think. Oh, I should just put it that broadly. People who have a diagnosis of borderline personality do, in fact, deal with a lot of stigma. It's an automatic assumption that they are manipulative and that they are liars or they are dramatic. So whatever they're presenting as is just drama. It's not real in some ways. What else did you find in terms of how you were treated, or did you ever get somebody to work with you, or?
Well, I finally did, which is my current therapist. But like going back to the stigma, it's something that just breaks my heart because it's like, people present differently even within the same diagnosis.
Mhm.
And for a clinician, someone who's been trained far more than I have and have, years of experience to sit there and be like, I'm not going to treat you because I assume you're going to, act in a certain way is just preposterous. Like, I believe anyone can be treated with effective boundaries, from a therapist. Like people present differently. So there's no need to assume that someone who has BPD is going to call you at all hours of the day, is going to, quote unquote, manipulate you, which is also another problem I have with that word because manipulation is just, unmet need. Like it's not,
Mhm.
you don't need to pathologize that either. But these people are being turned away when they need help just like anyone else. And it's horrible. And then we have the other segment of the population, which is autistic or neurodivergent individuals, which are who are being treated in a similar manner.
Right. And you were also asked while you were looking for a therapist on why your therapy terminated. How did that go?
Oh, it didn't go well. I forgot to mention this. The reason, besides crying, that they were turning me away is because I had mentioned that I just lost my therapist to 2 years and I'm so sad and I would start crying because of that. Because to have an attachment to a therapist and show, tears indicated to them BPD, that I was having, too much of an attachment or whatever they were thinking. I don't know. But so they used that to turn me away at a time when I really, really needed help, and it's just heartbreaking. And it's just like, this is what other people experience on a regular basis. And that's the part that kills me.
Yeah. Well, like I mentioned in the last segment, you lost your job, you lost a friend, you lost your grandma, and then you lost your therapist. That is a lot of loss, and anybody on the planet who's a normal human being would have an emotional reaction to that. And I have a hard time because with your story, because to me, anybody would think that if you're having a difficult emotional time because of loss like this, the person you would go to for help to get through it would be a therapist. And in fact, they say that to you, but it sounds like what you got instead was really just people turning you away.
Yeah, because I was crying too much about a therapy ending. I think that indicated to them that I might have borderline personality, which is something they don't want to work with. A lot of them don't want to work with.
You did finally find a therapist.
Yeah, I finally found a therapist who has been so patient with me. Like it's just been unbelievable because I've developed a little bit of anger toward the therapy profession as someone who's going in the field. So I would relay my anger toward, the entire mental health profession and how much harm it's doing. And she just patiently listened to all of it. Like a lot of times therapists, some therapists, if they feel challenged, they
Mm.
will also turn away from you. They don't like that. So I've been very grateful in that I'm able to be more of myself with her.
That is good. And it is good that you found somebody who is able to hear you, not discredit, just challenge the mental health industry and how things are happening for people who are neurodiverse as you are. So, can you define for the audience neurodiversity? And in whatever way, you don't have to, it doesn't have to be the definition, just what does it mean for you?
From what I've learned, basically neurodiversity is any way the brain diverges from the norm. I take that to mean like autism, OCD, ADHD, dyslexia. A lot of times people are also including basically a lot of mental illness, mental disorders to be under the neurodivergent umbrella. So, but yeah, I can speak specifically to autism and ADHD.
So, what is autism and ADHD for you?
It's just a different lens of different way of looking at the world. It's like I notice details a lot. I things that other people don't notice. Just like sensory. Like sometimes things might be like too loud or too hot. It's just a different way of being. Like I want to say it has impacted me most in like social relationships because people don't really like people who are different. So it's just been hard like finding other people to connect with. But
Do you see yourself different than neurotypicals?
I see myself as different in the way that I like view the world and the way that I see things. Like if I go out in nature, I'll notice all sorts of little things that people who I'm with, on a walk with completely overlook. So I kind of like enjoy those things. It does come with challenges, like just wanting routine, wanting to do generally the same thing, not like literally the same thing, but like generally having your routine be the same, which is why like when all those losses happened several years ago, it was so hard for me because it was like a disruption to what I'm.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a lot of transitioning that you had to do in almost several areas of your life, major areas of your life. How does autism impact on? I just want to make sure people have a good sense of what autism means for you or ADHD. How do those things impact your daily life? Or do they?
I haven't really assessed that part in depth yet. Like we just came to the autism diagnosis about maybe 6 months ago. So it's kind of a recent thing to me. But again, like mostly what it does for me is or affects me is like wanting the routine and like having like more social difficulties. But it doesn't and ADHD definitely makes it hard. Like I'm in graduate school and it makes it hard to focus and read long articles and stay organized. So I mean there is like a negative aspect to it for sure, but overall like I'm trying to learn that it's just a different way of being and it doesn't mean that you're less than.
No. No, and in fact, ADHD and autism can provide with some pretty powerful tools that are often overlooked as for how beneficial they can be. Do you think that people see you as autistic or see you as being diverse? And I ask that because um, I think the general population has a stereotypical idea of what autism is.
Absolutely, because like through the media and through like everything in the world, we are taught that autism looks like, the non-functioning little boy who's into like trains, who doesn't make eye contact, like who is like hitting his head, like stuff like we have a set list of like these stereotypical like stigmatized behaviors, but in reality, autism can be any other person you meet on the street. It's not, it's there's something called well, we don't use functioning labels anymore, but like females who formerly are called, high functioning autistics, they do something called masking, which is learning what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to sound, what you're supposed to say in social situations, and doing that. So a lot of times these people are getting overlooked with an autism diagnosis, and they're, being called, they're being labeled with borderline, they're being labeled with bipolar or any number of other things.
And so when you're neurodiverse, stimulation becomes a really difficult thing. You have to kind of limit the stimulation going on or the transitions happening because too much of it can lead to a meltdown. And I think, like you were talking about, the boy who has autism who behaves in certain ways that have become the stereotypical idea of what that is. If you're a high functioning female, sorry for the label, the wording, and are no longer able to mask, what happens?
What generally happens is you're not supported, you're stigmatized, you're, thrown into the mental health system. I know I have done some readings about like people of color who have meltdowns in public who are taken away by the police, like
Mm,
all sorts of bad things happen because people don't have this understanding
right.
that these people aren't being violent or dangerous. They just, need some space or time to cool down, and, it's okay.
So what does that look like? What are people seeing that they're misunderstanding as something else?
Um, I think they're just equating it with being dangerous or being dysfunctional and needing to
Yeah.
be in care.
What is the neurodiverse person doing? What were you doing that people thought was something else? Like, were you crying? Were you hiding? Were you having an argument?
So I was crying way too much, which can look like emotional dysregulation and impulsivity. I was talking about, sadness about my therapist, the 2 years abruptly terminating me, which looks like fear of abandonment. Criteria of BPD, which again, for anyone listening, it's clinicians don't seem to understand that it's not fear of abandonment. It really, it's frantic efforts to avoid abandonment, and I have issues with that. But anyway, they thought that
I would just want to jump in here because and make sure that we're clear here. You were abandoned by your therapist.
I was abandoned by my
Yeah,
therapist.
so it's not a fear of abandonment. You weren't crying because you feared abandonment. You were abandoned.
It took me a whole year to realize that afterwards, because my therapist was like, wait a minute, so you actually were crying because you were abandoned, but they were labeling that as a criteria for BPD. I'm like, yeah, I guess that did happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I still get over, I can't get over the idea that you were coming to people emotional about these things that were really happening in your life, and they were trying to tell you that that was, I guess, not real, and that you were just, I don't understand why a therapist isn't there to deal with people's emotions. I don't get it. You had dialectical, I can't even say it, DBT. So you had DBT therapy.
Mhm.
What does that mean? Was it a certain amount of time? Um,
It all depends within the program. It's dialectical behavior therapy, which I think the essence of is like learning to see both ends of like a situation, like something is good and bad at the same time. Not so much black and white thinking,
Mhm.
um, which is like seems to be the go-to treatment for borderline personality disorder. And I realize that does help a lot of people, but I also realize that a lot of neurodivergent autistic people are sent to DBT. And for a lot of people, myself included, what it taught us is how to mask more, how
Mhm.
to like act in social situations so that we're more acceptable to everyone else, you know. So
Right.
it wasn't helpful at all. And it's like as an adult, I already felt like I knew my skills. Like I've acquired those as I've been growing up. So it was a complete waste of time. But for me, again, I know it benefits some people, but I did it to people please, and I thought that's what I was supposed to do so that I could continue receiving help.
Right. And so one psychologist decided that because I'm looking at your article, that one psychologist decided that because you were still emotional, or having feelings about things. Am I defining that? I can't believe that I'm having to say this. That you hadn't done the work in the DBT thing, that it's the best treatment. I think that's a quote you have here. One psychologist said, "Are you sure you took the therapy? Because DBT is the best treatment for people like you." End of quote.
Yeah.
Um, I don't understand. I'm sorry. I guess I'm totally flabbergasted that people get onto a line and they stay on that line without realizing that if something isn't working, that maybe that's not the cure, that's not the answer, that's not helping. So maybe their initial decision about what it was is also not the answer. Um, so, but you're saying that you did go to DBT therapy and that was helpful for you.
I don't think it personally wasn't helpful for it was not helpful for me, but it has been for other people. And that's what this is. So that was the psychologist that you reference is someone I quoted in my article. I had seen her for one session as an intake interview for future therapy sessions. And she suggested that I take DBT. And I told her that I have taken these modules, like a series of sessions. And that's when she said, "Are you sure? DBT is the best treatment for people like you." And I'm sitting here thinking, people like who? Like, what are you talking about? Like, it's just like her disbelief. It wasn't just crying and excessive emotionality. It was, I was displaying anger. I was, challenging the system. I was challenging the therapist. I was doing all these things that are, traditionally portrayed of like, against the BPD population, which is also unfair. But yeah, so
What
it
is
was
this? What is the shortest amount of time that a therapist talked to you before telling you you had borderline personality?
I'm gonna say 15 minutes. I had two 15-minute phone calls for consultation. That's when the therapist agrees, to talk to the person to see if it'll be a good fit. And in this 15 minutes, she said that sounds like you have borderline personality, and I don't treat that. One of the therapists spelled it out for me as if I never heard about this before. I'm like, I can laugh about it now, but when I was in distress and when I wanted help, oh my gosh, it was like salt in the wound. Like
Yeah,
bad.
yeah, absolutely. It would be. We just need to take a little break, Lynn, but we'll be right back, folks.
If you were swimming upstream from the sea or an orca swimming out in the blue, you'd want to listen to Co-op Radio because we'd be listening to you. If you want to know where your music has come from or where your politicians have been, Co-op Radio's got that information without the media. We're not tied to big corporations, so we can dig deep into the truth. Community voices you won't hear except in our radio booths. If you want to own a radio station, be part of 40 years cooperation. Keep Co-op Radio alive. 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 100.5.
You're listening to Rethreading Madness on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm Bernadine Fox, and I have the pleasure of speaking with Lynn, who is currently in university studying for a psychology degree, and actually going towards a doctorate, who wrote the article, Dear Therapist, this is what BPD stigma looks like. Not BPD, but BPD stigma. How rampant do you think the stigma is around borderline personality?
I think it's huge. I am as someone who's entering the mental health field, as a professional, I'm horrified because I'm in some, like therapist oriented groups on different social media platforms. And the amount of things I have heard and I have seen from therapists about this population just bewilders me. Like it's unfortunately more rampant than it should be.
Yeah, I have read some of those stories from survivors about their experience of DBT, and I'm actually a little horrified by it. I keep trying to keep an open mind, but I wish I was hearing more stories about how it does help.
Mhm.
What kind of harm do you think happens when clinicians misdiagnose, like what you've experienced?
So what happens, I believe, is deep internalized shame. Like I would open up the DSM or just do Google searches, for these disorders I'd been labeled, and I would cry and cry because I'm like, this doesn't feel like it's a fit, but they're saying it's a fit, so it must be. What do I know, right? Like I'm not the one who has 20 years of experience. So I would say deep shame because I started to dislike myself more. My self-esteem plummeted. Like I wasn't sleeping as well initially because I was shocked that, this diagnosis came out of thin air. I didn't want to interact with people as much because I was like, well, like I'm messed up. That's how they're treating me, quite frankly. So, yeah.
So in the 2 years that you were working with this therapist once a week, did BPD come up at all?
It never came up. I look back and I try to play in my mind like what went wrong at what point. And I know sometimes she would make like sometimes, like the lights would be too bright in the office or she'd be tapping her pen and I would get a little agitated. And like once she made a comment about manipulation regarding, like the outward reaction I was having regarding these things. Or like, like if the session was on the same date during the same, same date, same time, I would get a little like missing my, Wednesdays at 7 p.m. or whatever it was. But like she would refer to these behaviors, which are common in autistic individuals. She used the word manipulative.
Mm.
She would get frustrated with me sometimes because I like things repeated back to me. I wouldn't understand things always that she was talking about. So like looking back, maybe there were like a couple words, couple signs here and there. I'm thinking having so much sadness for her threatening to terminate me is also another thing that she associated with borderline. So I'm thinking like in her mind, she's thinking, oh no, here's this, client who has BPD. I don't want to work with her. So it just kind of like escalated.
So you think that she privately had this diagnosis and was trying to apply things, and because it wasn't working, instead of realizing that her diagnosis or her thinking about it was wrong, she decided you were a resistant patient and not working with. I'm going to just switch because I'm going to get mad. It's I just don't understand an industry that really literally isn't accountable to the very people who are their clients, and you go to them for help, and instead you got harmed, Lynn. When people who are neurodiverse have meltdowns, who are they harming anyone?
Generally, no, absolutely not. I have never heard of a single person who has hurt or harmed anyone. I know some individuals may engage in self-harm, but that's, something to help regulate themselves,
Right.
whatever that looks like.
And I do know someone who has autism and is ADHD, and they are highly sensitive. And I don't mean that in the, to dismiss, you're too sensitive kind of thing, but just as a matter of fact. So they taste things other people can't taste. They hear things from, that nobody in their right mind would even think could be heard, but they have, and it's been true. Um, they feel things on their skin that most people don't feel. So a small scratch will be extremely painful. So highly, highly sensitive. And so I think it took me a long time to recognize that it wasn't made up. I couldn't understand how a scratch could be so hurtful or painful. And often I didn't understand. I didn't get it either. I'm sure I was, terrible to that person in lots of ways. Not because I certainly didn't say it was made up or anything like that, but certainly not understanding the level to which other people feel and see and in, taste and things that other people can't. So, yeah. So, and I often see meltdowns as a means of reacting finally after masking so long. You can tell me if I'm wrong. After masking takes a lot of energy. Um,
Yeah.
isn't it like it could like having a meltdown is just a reaction to having not being able to mask anymore because you don't have any more energy to mask.
Yeah. And it's just like a reaction to things being too much, things building up over time, it just kind of like, I like to think of it as a volcano, like the pressure builds up until, it can't any longer. But it's never, violent or harmful toward others or anything that anyone would portray. I would wish that people would do is to one, like give these clients a chance, whatever they're labeling them as, and two, like to educate themselves. Like autism is on a spectrum. You have your absolutely non-functioning to your functioning or higher. We don't like the functioning labels are kind of like not used anymore, but you know what I mean? And
I
then
do.
like, so it's just, it presents itself differently. And oh, that's a big one. Educating themselves about the neurodiversity movement. Like that there are these group of people who present in similar ways as other disorders. They're growing exponentially, right? Like people are coming, discovering, that they're autistic or other neurodivergence left and right. So they have to learn. Therapists need to learn about this like forgotten about or overlooked group.
Absolutely, I agree. And now neurodiversity is something that is I don't want to say new because I don't think it's new. I think it's just like you're saying, it's something that's newly recognized on some level. Not that it hasn't been out there for over a decade, I suspect, but certainly I hear about more and more people who describe themselves as neurodiverse. So what you're saying then is that the mental health industry needs to get on board and get educated on how to help these people. Certainly, and I would add to that again, that if you're treating somebody as a borderline and the treatment isn't working, then it's highly possible that the diagnosis is the problem and not the client.
I absolutely agree.
What kind of harm happens to the client? I know we touched on this a little bit before, but I just want to make sure we haven't just glossed over it.
Well, I was going to say, besides them internalizing the stigma and the harm, what happens is they drop out of mental health treatment. They're not going to go back. They're not going to seek therapy or try medication or anything that might help them because why should they? They've been hurt by the people who are, are supposed to like protect and, help them. So
yes. So being neurodiverse though doesn't mean you need to be in therapy, but being neurodiverse doesn't mean that you don't need therapy as well, right?
right, absolutely. It just differs, with the person.
What is one of the biggest things you think therapists should do in therapy with someone who's neurodiverse?
I would say number one, please learn about the neurodiversity movement and also about different neurodivergence or like things like autism, ADHD. And number two, just ask your client, like, what does this look like for you? Like that, you started that question, you asked me that question. I think that's great for a therapist to ask, like, what does this look like for you? How does it present? How does it affect your life? What do you struggle with? What do you do really well at? Because, it's not like, a whole like a bunch of, negative stuff. There's lots of positive stuff attached to it as well. So just like get to know your client and not necessarily like stereotypes from like the media or wherever you got them from.
Yeah, and don't jump too quickly towards borderline. In fact, maybe what needs to happen if you are about to diagnose someone with borderline, take a second look
Absolutely.
and see whether or not that's exactly where you need to go. Thank you, Lynn. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and I have no doubt that people will get a lot out of having listened to you talk about being neurodiverse and this experience of yours, which is, in my opinion, horrendous that you went through this. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
All of these lines across my face tell you the story of who I am. So many stories of where I've been, and now I got to where I am. But these stories don't mean anything when you've got no one to tell them to. It's true, I was made for you. I climbed across the mountain tops, swam all across the ocean blue. I crossed over land and I broke all rules, and baby I broke them all for you. Oh, because even when I was flat broke, you made me feel like $1,000,000. You do. I was made for you. You see the smile that's on my mouth, it's hiding the words that don't come out. All of my friends who think that I'm blessed, they don't know my head is a mess. No, they don't know who I really am, and they don't know what I've been through like you do. And I was made for you. All of these lines across my face tell you the story of who I am. So many stories of where I've been, and now I got to where I am. Oh, but these stories don't mean anything when you've got no one to tell them to. It's true, I was made for you. Oh yeah, it's true that I was made for you.
If you want to listen to us anywhere you travel, you can go into your Google Play Store and then download the Radio Player Canada app, and you can listen to your favorite radio station, Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM.
If you were a a salmon upstream from the sea or an orca swimming out in the blue. You'd want to listen to Co-op Radio because we'd be listening to you. If you want to know where your music has come from or where your politicians have been, Co-op Radio has got that information without the media mogul spin. We're not tied to big corporations, so we can dig deep into truths. Community voices you won't hear except in our radio booths. If you want to own a radio station, be part of 40 years cooperation, be part of 100.5. Keep Co-op Radio alive.
Doorknobber. When a client drops a therapeutic bombshell as they are leaving a session, counselors call this a doorknobber. In Lynn's case, after working with her therapist for 2 years, who never mentioned borderline before, spits it out at the end of a call to terminate their therapeutic relationship. This is a doorknobber done by the therapist. My ex-therapist told me at one point that she didn't believe borderline existed and that therapists only give it to the clients they don't like. And certainly in therapy abuse, we hear so often that clients are being labeled borderline after they have left therapy and are confronting an abusive therapist. Why would they employ borderline so often? Because one of the things people believe about those who are borderline is that they lie and make up things, ergo, they won't be believed that the abusive therapist did harm or sexually assaulted them. And once you have that label, it is a sticky thing, even if it's wrong. Worse, professionals make assumptions about folks with that label, even if it's a misdiagnosis. Like Lynn's experience, people have described to me being told they are borderline after a 15-20 minute session. Given the level of stigma that is attached to diagnoses like this one, it should be considered unprofessional to apply the borderline diagnosis unless they have seen the client for a good length of time. And in fact, according to the DSM, a BPD diagnosis must be based on assessing the functioning and behavior of the patient over a length of time, and after other possible diagnoses have been ruled out. What they mandate for this diagnosis is, quote, a thorough evaluation, end of quote, that provides a, quote, comprehensive assessment, end of quote, which, quote, considers multiple sources of information, including personal history, collateral information, and a mental status examination, end of quote. Clearly, this is not possible in an initial 20-minute session or over a first consultation, but nonetheless, we hear it over and over where this diagnosis is being applied all too quickly, and those who have been misdiagnosed with BPD in particular suffer even more from the stigma the medical and mental health community apply to them. We should all be more careful. My thanks to Lynn for joining me today. If you're interested in reading her article on this issue, you can find it on medium.com, and it is entitled, Dear Therapist, This is What BPD Stigma Looks Like. My gratitude to Clendinding, Carlisle, and Ulrich for the gift of their music, but most importantly, it is you, our listeners, who make this program work. Thank you for joining us today. Stay safe out there. You've just listened to Rethreading Madness, where we dare to change how we think about mental health. We air live on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM, every Tuesday at 5 p.m. or online at coopradio.org. If you have questions or feedback about this program, or want to share your story, or have something to say to us, we want to hear from you. You can reach us by email, rethreadingmadness@coopradio.org. This is Bernadine Fox. We'll be back next week. Until then.